Here I stand before you today, and you expect me to deliver a sermon. Indeed, the worship bulletin says we have time carved out for this today. It says, "Message, I saw the light, Reverend Schwartz." But I wonder what you think, what you expect. What should the sermon be about? Should it be about you? Should it be about this church? Should it be about the text? Should it be about Jesus? How should it go? Should it begin with a funny story, anecdote, or a question? Something to grab your attention, to win your ears for a time? Should the middle explain the text that our lay leader spoke aloud to us today? Should it end with a practical application with me telling you what to do? Preacher, tell me what I'm supposed to do. Maybe you think, you've listened to me enough times, you know how it's going to go. You already know. How long should the sermon be? I have a friend that can go for 45 minutes, and I always tell him, cut it down. I say, that's 3 sermons. Make it 15 minutes or less. What should the sermon do? Should it entertain you? Should it teach you? Should it make you think? Should it inspire and lift you up? Should it, dare I say, convict you? As they say, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Who are you today? And last of all, do we even need a sermon? Should we just skip it all together? I had a preaching professor, first thing we did in class is like, why even preach? Just move on, Justin. Let's get to the next part. Well, the Apostle Paul writes of preaching like this, I wanted you to hear. He says, "For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." The very power of God. "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scholar? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided that through the foolishness of preaching, he would save those who believe." The foolishness of preaching. I want to share today that in preaching, especially from our message about the Transfiguration, we receive clarity from God. How else will we know the wisdom of God in contrast to human wisdom? How else will we know the power of God for our salvation? Are we just going to figure it out for ourselves one day? I tend to think not. Today, the message concerning the transfiguration of Jesus is fairly simple. It's about clarity. Consider the transfiguration of Jesus as a seeing through, a making known, a revealing about Jesus. I saw the light, we say. This is how it goes. On the mountain, Jesus is transfigured, thus revealing his divinity. Jesus is shown to be God. Next, the disciples witness this and do what anyone should do in the presence of God. They worship. And to confirm that all of this is right and good, a bright cloud that represents God the Father overtakes them, and a voice says, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And the disciples react by falling to the ground in fear, but Jesus clarifies this isn't the right response. He says, "Get up and do not be afraid." And on the way down the mountain, Jesus reveals that he must die and be resurrected. Meaning, the one who is revealed as God, the one who is to be worshiped, the one who is to be listened to, the one who says, "Do not be afraid," is also the one who suffers, dies, and is raised for us. If you didn't know who Jesus was and what he would do, clarity. This is about clarity. Who is Jesus? God. What should we do together in response to this revelation about Jesus? Worship. Where do we find our direction? Listen to Jesus. What should we do when we understand this? We are told, do not be afraid, but be ready. And what does the one who is God, who is rightly worshiped, who is rightly listened to, do? Offers his life for our sake in love. This is about clarity. And as clear as possible, we are shown this, who God is and how we are to respond. We are called to worship and obey this Jesus who gives himself in love for us. And that should be a revolution. That should be world-shaking stuff. For there is a clarity of what our lives should center around. Jesus Christ. It's clear that we know Jesus is God, so then nothing else can take first place. Everything else is relativized. What comes into question is our priorities. We must be kidding ourselves if we can't even carve out 1 hour per week for public worship. I mean, if you don't try to make time for worship, everything else, how are you going to worship Jesus? You will worship something else, but what will it be? We must be in denial if we say that we know who Jesus is, but we dismiss or ignore his teachings. Do we really know who this Jesus is that we say? Or are we maybe just culturally Christians? We can think of it this way. Clarity about Jesus gives clarity to our lives. In his light, the furniture of our lives has to be rearranged. We must seek to love God with all that we are, right? The first and greatest commandment. We must seek to do what is right and love our neighbor with all that we are, the second commandment. We must seek to know the truth about Jesus and all things. It becomes very clear. And maybe this clarity is why the disciples are frightened. Maybe the light bulb went off in their heads and they thought, oh no, I've messed up. My life has been about all these other things. It's scary to think that what you've done before is a misstep. The light is always uncomfortable when it reveals what is in the darkness, or it reveals that what you thought is light is actually killing you. That you've loved all the wrong things or dedicated your life to the wrong things. But those fears end when we realize what we know of Jesus here is a gift of love to us. Jesus died on the cross for us. Jesus was raised from the dead for us. Jesus fills us with his Spirit so that we may know the truth and not be afraid, so that we may know him completely in clarity in his truth. So I pray today that you receive clarity. Because if anything, the least I should be doing today is pointing you to Jesus. I call you to fully receive all that has been made clear. Receive that Jesus is God. I call you to worship Jesus in response. I call you to listen and obey to Jesus in response. I call you to not be afraid, but be ready to act as Jesus' hands and feet. I call you to receive the love of God revealed in the cross of Christ. So let us seek and follow after Jesus with all we are today, as individuals and as a church. Amen. Amen.